It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Coming up, a major development in the Lucy Letby investigation. Police investigating the Countess of Chester Hospital, where she murdered 7 babies and tried to kill 7 more, have widened their inquiries to include gross negligence manslaughter, focusing on the action or inaction of individuals at that hospital. Also ahead, the Prime Minister scraps the body that runs the health service in England. Sir Keir Starmer says abolishing NHS England will bring healthcare back into democratic control. But thousands of people will lose their jobs, and experts have questioned the need for such widespread reform. We'll find out tonight what it means for you and your family. Plus, teachers abandoning the classroom with no recruits taking their place. We'll be discussing why education vacancies in England have hit their highest level ever. And free food at Tesco. The supermarket giant introduces 0p yellow tickets, all in the name of net zero. Well, that's come much more on the UK Tonight. Well, first tonight, police investigating the hospital where Lucy Letby murdered 7 babies and attempted to kill 7 more have now widened their inquiries to include gross negligence manslaughter. After Letby was convicted, an investigation into corporate manslaughter was launched at the Countess of Chester Hospital. But tonight, Chester Constabulary has announced it's also examining potential negligent action or inaction of individuals at that hospital. Well, I'm joined now in the studio by our correspondent Ashna Huranag, who's been following the details on this, because this came into us just a few hours ago, Ashna. So this is a widening of the police investigation, and it's into the hospital. It's separate from Lucy Letby in a certain respect.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it is a significant development, so it's important that we're talking about it. Essentially, the police in Cheshire have now identified and notified suspects, so essentially staff members, in connection to the probe into these babies' deaths between 2012 and 2016 at the Countess of Chester Hospital. I think it's important, though, that we break down what the difference is between corporate manslaughter and gross negligence manslaughter. So corporate manslaughter, something they began looking into after the conviction of Lucy Letby in October 2023. That offence is concerned purely with corporate liability, so it doesn't apply to directors or other individuals in senior management roles. A substantial part of any breach, if proven, must be in the way that activities are managed by people in senior roles. What's different this time is for gross negligence manslaughter, this does apply to individuals, and prosecutions against individuals are taken both when there is sufficient evidence and if it's in the public interest to do so. Police say in Cheshire that they won't be confirming the number of people that are involved in this gross negligence manslaughter investigation. They won't be confirming their identity as no arrests or charges have yet been made. Lucy Letby, it's worth reminding our viewers, is currently serving 15 life orders after being convicted of the murder of 7 young babies and the attempted murder of another 7. There is no timescale for this police investigation, but Sarah-Jane, this is yet more trauma for the families involved.
Yeah. Ashna, thank you very much. Ashna Huranag with the development on that story. More to come as and when we get it. Overstretched and unfocused, that was the Prime Minister's verdict on the National Health Service today, as he announced radical plans to scrap the body that runs the health service in England. Sir Keir Starmer saying that he's cutting bureaucracy and bringing the NHS back into democratic control. He's reversing a decision that was made 12 years ago when the Conservative government created NHS England to give the health service greater independence. The big question now is whether today's announcement will actually improve performance. That's the responsibility the government is taking on in a way that it hasn't for a really long time. In just a moment, we'll discuss what the plans could mean for patients. But first, our health correspondent, Laura Bundock, has this report.
This is the end of an era for the NHS, now facing radical reorganisation. Ordered from the top.
I'm bringing management of the NHS back into democratic control by abolishing the arm's-length body NHS England. That will put the NHS back at the heart of government where it belongs.
NHS England was set up in 2012 under David Cameron. Its aim to provide the NHS independence from government.
The result, though, is this: a messy spaghetti soup of services, money and accountability. NHS England sandwiched in the middle between the government, the Department of Health and Social Care and clinical services, hospitals, GPs, care homes, with us, the patients at the end. And look at the red and green lines. There's overlap, duplication. And that, says the government, is dragging down efficiency.
What today is about is making sure that we deliver better value for taxpayers, generating hundreds of millions of pounds worth of savings by halving the size. And while I've been trying to build one team across the two organisations, actually just having one centre, one head office, much smaller, smarter, doing the things that only we can do nationally.
Here's part of the problem. Since NHS England began, look how much longer A&E waits have grown. The target is this yellow line, only 5% of people having to wait over 4 hours. It's not been met, though, in over a decade. Another priority is the elective waiting list. There are now 7.4 million treatments waiting to be carried out. It's the lowest since April 2023, but look how much it's grown overall, made worse by the pandemic.
The scrapping of NHS England surprised some, but there were signs. Several senior leaders, including Chief Executive Amanda Pritchard, recently stepped down. What now for the 13,000 people working here? Their future's uncertain. Uncertainty too from some whether the demise of NHS England will deliver.
The benefit, of course, of having NHS England there as the national commissioning body is that you have an organisation who is one step removed from the political day-to-day management of the health service, which, of course, is a big factor. And so I think the government is going to have to manage that transition period. It's a huge tanker that they are going to be seeking to turn. There will be bumps in the road.
There is a 10-year plan coming, but this a moment of major reform. For patients waiting, though, the structures and management don't matter. They just want to be seen and treated quickly. Laura Bundock, Sky News.
OK, what is all of this going to mean for healthcare in England? To discuss that, because that's what people at home really care about, I'm joined now by Stephen Dorrell, who served as Health Secretary under John Major and was then the chair of the NHS Confederation. You will, of course, recognise our health expert, Dr Nikita Kanani, who previously served as Director of Clinical Integration at NHS England, and Dermot MacDonald, the Director of Just Treatment, a campaign group seeking to improve the NHS. So good perspectives from you all. Stephen, I'll come to you first, if I may. This was seen as an unexpected and bold move by the government. The original idea of NHS England was to have the NHS one step removed from politics, out of political control. Now it's being returned to political hands. What are your thoughts?
Well, to be honest, I was always sceptical of the objective of removing the NHS from political control. I don't think it was either deliverable or desirable for politicians, in some sense, to stand apart from what was going on in the health service. So I was sceptical about NHS England from the start. But my biggest question, and it's a neutral question at this stage in the proceedings, we know what the government wants to abolish. What we don't know is what they want to put in its place. And I think those are the difficult questions. It's easy to remove something, as we've shown time and time again with NHS reorganisations. It's much more difficult to build something, a structure that does work and deliver the objectives we all have for it.
Yeah, that's interesting. You think there should be something in its place, because from the sound of Wes Streeting today, was speaking to the Politics Hub just before we came on air, you know, the government want to be able to make decisions directly without having to go through a middleman, without all the bureaucracy, the red tape. You know, they've promised the electorate in their manifesto they're going to sort out the NHS, and they need to do that speedily and efficiently. And they want to do that. But, of course, NHS England, and Dr Nikita Kanani, you can attest to this, the NHS England does more than just, procurement and make some of these big decisions. It's also responsible for collecting data, for education and training, procurement. Perhaps you can talk to me about, what you think should be in its place, if anything at all, because surely the Department of Health and Social Care can't take it all on board.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of functions there that you've described, Sarah-Jane, and I think that's one of the challenges. In the media package just before we came on, there was a conversation about A&E wait times increasing and about waiting lists increasing. They haven't been increasing because there is another structure in place, like NHS England. They've increased because the population has changed, the workforce has changed. So what I would be putting in is a really clear commitment on workforce, a really clear commitment on capacity, and a really clear fix for social care, because actually unless we tackle those areas, nothing's actually going to change, and we can keep moving things around. But what we need to focus on is the people at the heart of this. And one of the things that has been really disheartening to see is a narrative around the NHS being abolished. And I think it's really important that people out there understand that that is not the case, that there is another reorganisation of the NHS that keeps happening, but care needs to still be delivered. People who are delivering that care need to feel that they can still do their job, but that's going to be really hard right now because this change is going to go on for a long time.
Yeah, care still needs to be delivered, and quite frankly, it needs to be delivered better in so many different areas of the country. I know Wes Streeting talked about postcode lottery as well, and by bringing everything back closer to government, he wanted to tackle that. Dermot, if I could bring you in, Director of Just Treatment. When you heard this announcement today, could you see the correlation between getting rid of NHS England and better care and treatment for patients?
Well, thanks, Sarah-Jane. I think when I heard the news, I think my first thought was with our supporters. We've got tens of thousands of supporters across the country who are NHS patients, and every day we get emails from people whose quality of care is just not good enough. And so those are people who absolutely believe in the NHS, know that it's the best way to deliver public health for this country, but are just consistently being let down by it at present. And I think for many of them, it will be a difficult a difficult question for them to answer, how the experience they've had is connected to the decisions that have been made today. And I think there's a lot of stuff that is yet to be answered in terms of how things are going to be changed once NHS England evaporates. And one of the things we're concerned about is that wider context. So this isn't just a reorganisation, it's also a cost-cutting exercise. We've also seen today announcements that integrated care boards, another part of the NHS organisation, are going to have to cut their costs by 50%. We've seen a lot of coverage about the potential for billions being cut from disability benefits and other public welfare payments. Those kinds of cuts and the context that these changes are happening in are likely to put even more pressure on the NHS and make it more difficult for the NHS to deliver the care they need. And if we look to the Darcy report, which looked back at the Lansley reforms that were alluded to in your opening bit, the reason they failed, or one of the reasons they failed, was that those huge reorganisations happened whilst costs within the NHS were capped and funding was not increasing. If we risk doing the same thing with a large-scale reorganisation without significantly increased funds, I have very grave concerns things are going to get worse instead of better.
Yeah, reorganisation or a scrapping of a body that was essentially doubling up. Again, the Health Secretary, I'm going to come to you on this, Stephen. Essentially, the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, saying, look, NHS England, everyone there, it's no disrespect to the job they were doing, but they were doubling up with jobs that were already being done by the Department of Health. In taking out NHS England, you're actually taking away a lot of that, saving money, and that money should go to frontline services. I mean, that sounds quite simple, doesn't it? Redirecting that kind of money to frontline services. Is it that simple?
Well, first of all, the amount of money spent on NHS England, it's a big sum of money, but in the context of the NHS budget as a whole, it's actually not a particularly large percentage. I've already said I was a skeptic about the objectives of NHS England at the beginning. It was always, I think, badly designed, and it always was bound to lead to duplication. And of course, I'm in favour of eliminating the duplication. But there are two dogs that haven't barked in this discussion today. One, Nikki Kanani mentioned, which is social care, the links between health and social care, if we don't improve those, and we need to understand how they're going to be improved, then we'll never deliver a health and care system that's going to work. And the second is that this discussion, it takes place as if it's all about bureaucratic management of a service, whereas actually the objective here is one that Wes Streeting does talk about, to be fair, but hasn't really followed through, which is how we deliver better health outcomes, prevention, avoiding people going to hospital when they don't need to be there, easy access to services that keep people out of hospital and enable them to live well, social care, pharmacies, general practice, community services. We default to talking about hospitals. Hospitals are important, but they're there for people who are seriously ill, and we all want to avoid going to hospital when we don't need to.
Yeah, Wes Streeting, when he's speaking to Sir Trevor Phillips earlier on Sky News, talked about a too difficult box. And he wants to be the health secretary that, you know, takes the NHS out of the too difficult box and does something about it. He is expected to unveil his grand plan for the NHS. It's expected sometime in May. This looks like the first phase of that, tackling bureaucracy and red tape that gets talked about so much. As you said, more pertinent things to patients need to be discussed, like social care, like prevention, that definitely are in the too difficult box up until now, Dr. Nikki Kanani, but they may well be tackled in May. What are some of the things that you think the Health Secretary could and should do when he makes those big announcements?
Well, as Stephen talked about, I mean, one of the big areas is prevention. So there's this massive scope now. We've always talked about how do we start moving to a preventative NHS. So actually, what are the building blocks that we can put in place now? And the other point is primary care. Primary care is general practice, it's community pharmacy, optometry, dentistry, all the things that keep you well, rather than in A&E or on an elective wait list. So actually, how are we going to design a primary care that's ready for the future, which is a future that has people living longer, living with more complexity, living with ageing. And we've got this opportunity now to actually take this reorganisation and turn it into something meaningful for patients, for people, because at the end of the day, that's what people will be worried about when they hear this news today. They'll be worried about their care today, their family's care, and they need to know that they're going to get a better deal out of this.
Something that has been brought up in the discussion today has been the P word, privatisation, which always comes up when we talk about the state of the NHS and what its future may look like. Dermot, I'm going to bring you in on that. Wes Streeting, again, speaking to Sky News earlier, said that is absolutely not in Labour's plans. Yes, private elements of healthcare can help the NHS, but their principles are that it will always be free at the point of entry. However, he did hint at the private sector and the public health sector somehow working together better. What do you make of that?
Yeah, well, it was interesting that a lot of the way that the government spun this change wasn't a headline necessarily on cost cutting, was this increase in democratisation. And I guess what some of our patients would be concerned about is the fact that the public at large do not support the accelerated privatisation of NHS care. Whenever more and more of the services are provided by private profit-making companies, they fear the long-term consequences of that for the NHS, and they fear the short-term consequences for their patient outcomes. Now, 54% of the public would rather see increased investment from the government goes directly into publicly run NHS services, and only 33% support further privatised organisations providing that care. Now, that sits in significant contrast to the consistent rhetoric and the policy decisions that the Health Secretary has been making. And so I definitely feel that there is a concern amongst our supporters that this power grab by the Health Secretary will end up driving his agenda, which is quite an ideological one, to increase privatisation of services. And if that is the case, that would be a very undemocratic outcome for the NHS, and one which sits at odds of what the public truly want for the health service moving forward.
A final question, because we're running out of time. Stephen, I'm going to put it to you. Again, listening to the Health Secretary earlier, I've heard this statistic before, but it always stops me in my tracks when I hear it. You know, the Department of Health and Social Care have a budget the size of a country like Portugal. But they are looking at cutting costs, streamlining, making that money work harder and better. But you do think with a budget the size of a country like Portugal, there must be so much waste. How much of that needs to be tackled in this big plan that Labour has for healthcare?
Well, I mean, surely this is no more than common sense, is it? Nobody's in favour of waste. And that, incidentally, is not just the political commentariat. It goes for all the people who work in the health service as well. Nobody's in favour of waste. Everybody's in favour of a relentless drive to use money better to deliver the outcomes that we all want to see. But it's what's an illusion is to imagine that somehow, therefore, there are no difficult choices to be made. There are difficult choices to be made. We should be pursuing an efficient and effective healthcare system. Of course, that's true. But in addition to that, we have to ask difficult questions about how we deliver that. And I suppose my concluding thought would be it's an old saying that form should follow function. And I think the challenge to the government is to set out clearly what it wants different parts of the system to do, how it wants them to relate to each other. And only when it's done that can we be clear what's the form required for the bureaucracy that supports it. We've had the problem today is that we've had announcements about the form, but we've had no announcement about the function.
Stephen Norrell, former Conservative Health Secretary under John Major, Dr Nikita Kanani, former Medical Director of Primary Care for NHS England and NHS Improvement, and Emma MacDonald, Director of Just Treatment. Thank you so much for your time here on Sky News this evening. Really appreciate it. Now, hundreds of servicewomen have spoken out about sexual abuse and misogyny in the army following the death of Jaisley Beck. The 19-year-old took her own life after a campaign of harassment by her line manager and having made a complaint of sexual assault against a senior officer. Now, as a former minister admits, there has been a colossal failure of leadership in the army. We've heard from former soldiers who say their experiences have left them scarred for life. Our social affairs correspondent Becky Johnson has this report, and just to warn you, it contains reference to sexual assault and suicide that you may find distressing.
I had to fight him off me.
There was no place in the military for women. There was misogyny everywhere.
Women who served in the British Army, revealing the main threat was men they fought alongside. They say sexual harassment was relentless and assault impossible to escape. After years of silence, the suicide of 19-year-old soldier Jaisley Beck, who was sexually assaulted and failed by the army, has triggered an outpouring of fellow soldiers who say they too suffered abuse. 3 are now sharing their stories with Sky News. Michelle Francis was in the army for 11 years and saw active service in Afghanistan. She left in 2020.
I've had my breasts grabbed by people, my bum. Guys, when I've walked upstairs, have looked up my skirt and stuff to see if I'm wearing underwear. Just disgusting stuff like that.
And how often would this kind of thing happen?
All the time.
In 2019, almost 2 decades into a distinguished career, Jane says she was raped by a colleague.
He grabbed at my throat and was pushing me down onto this blow-up bed. And then he was trying to put his penis in my mouth. It was the worst experience I've ever been through in my life. I wanted to end it all.
She reported it, but later discovered messages exchanged between officers dealing with her case.
I was referred to as a whore, just really quite vile.
Jane was one of 3 servicewomen who took legal action in 2020 to try to stop rape cases being dealt with by military courts and instead transfer them to civilian courts where conviction rates are much higher.
But Parliament voted against the change. Among those who failed to back it was former Defence Minister and veteran Johnny Mercer.
We are confident that the service justice system is capable of dealing with all offences, whatever their seriousness.
Now he admits he got it wrong, telling Sky News, "I think ministers, like I was and must accept my part in this, and senior officers can put out as many directions and letters as they like. But the reality is that this represents a colossal failure of leadership across all ranks. I should have argued harder for serious and sexual offences to be taken away from the MOD to civilian police. Now is the time to make that change." The Ministry of Defence told us there's no place for bullying, harassment or discrimination in the military and that they're committed to stamping out inappropriate behaviour, but they declined to say whether they commit to making a change in law. Many believe sexual abuse hasn't just been tolerated, but allowed. Hayley was a 17-year-old new recruit when she told a senior officer she'd witnessed a female colleague being assaulted.
He dragged me by the back of my coat up the stairs to the office, and he stood over me screaming so much he was spitting, and he was saying, "Don't you dare speak about that ever again."
Months later, she too was assaulted. Her attacker never faced justice, while she joined the ranks of female soldiers who believed their predators were protected. Becky Johnson, Sky News.
And if you've been affected by that story, you can contact the Samaritans at any time, 116 123, or email joe@samaritans.org. Still to come on the UK Tonight, victims of the infected blood scandal are facing delays in receiving compensation. What's taking so long? A fresh warning that the flow of teachers quitting the profession is directly impacting the education of school children in England. And how a 10-year-old boy has become a fitness inspiration to millions after being bullied off the football pitch.
I'm James Matthews and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Do you fear a fourth indictment? Does your government owe an apology to the British home children?
Great to see you.
Does your government owe them an apology? The fact that they were intercepted, does that indicate a military weakness on the part of Iran?
No.
Free, wherever you get your news. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. You can feel a devastating power. It had been a difficult night in a deadly storm.
Bang, bang. You can hear it hitting the windows.
Our houses are okay.
It's depressing. As bad as all of this is, it could have been much worse. Today, this land they call sacred is at the heart of America's electric car revolution.
To me, it's a sacred ground.
The white gold rush is a race that Biden doesn't want to lose. I've covered some of the biggest stories in the world. Donald Trump, 45th President of the United States, it would appear is about to learn his fate.
Escort coming out!
San Quentin houses America's largest death row. They rarely allow cameras onto the condemned block.
James Matthews, Sky News.
I want to be treated equally like everyone else.
It's one step closer to getting out, to getting off death row.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Mr. Trump, James Matthews from Sky News.
Hey, James.
You're diminished by claims that you're a racist.
Question?
Mr. Musk, has your ignorance and ego cost Ukrainian lives? Vladimir Putin calls you outstanding. What do you call him, sir?
He's from Sky News. He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
The chair of the inquiry into the infected blood scandal says victims and their families have been left distressed and powerless by delays in the government compensation scheme. A multi-billion-pound compensation scheme has been announced for more than 30,000 victims of the worst treatment disaster in NHS history. But there are growing concerns over its implementation. Our health correspondent Ashish Joshi reports.
Stuart McLean is still fighting for justice. He was infected with hepatitis C following an NHS operation when he was just a child.
You will be eligible to claim compensation under the scheme.
In May last year, the Infected Blood Inquiry promised to deliver compensation to Stuart and to thousands like him. But many are still waiting, and for others, it's too late.
It gets harder watching friends die and fight for their life and then die. And reading the dates 2027, that works out probably another 200 people are going to die. And for the infected, 2029, it's absolutely shocking. This wasn't what was promised.
Infected blood products used knowingly and unknowingly in NHS procedures during the 70s and 80s saw tens of thousands of patients becoming infected with HIV and hepatitis. Many have since died. The chairman of the Infected Blood Inquiry, Sir Brian Langstaff, urged the government to act quickly in delivering long overdue compensation. But that has not happened.
It's a very welcome intervention.
And it's this delay which is causing more fear and anxiety.
It's hard to navigate, so they're relying on us to interpret government policy and legislation. What they want is simple answers to straightforward questions, and they're just not getting them.
Sir Brian said the anguish cannot be ignored any longer. He'll publish a report into the government's response and warned further hearings could be held. The distress and feelings of powerlessness expressed in many of these statements can neither be denied nor ignored. Our goal at the inquiry is to identify whether there are practical measures that could be taken or changes made to address the concerns that have been brought to us. Our intention is for this to be a constructive process, and we're anxious not to contribute to further delay in individuals receiving compensation. When Sir Brian Langstaff delivered his long-awaited report here in May last year, the infected blood community thought then that their 40-year-long campaign for justice had finally come to an end. But his intervention today shows that that fight is still far from over. More infected people have come forward since the report was published. But tragically, many more will die before they see any of the money that has been promised to them. Ashish Joshi, Sky News.
Well, the government has responded to Sir Brian's intervention, saying this: the victims of this scandal have suffered unspeakably, and we remain fully committed to cooperating with the inquiry and acting on its recommendations. Now, in other news today, we all know that teachers are being stretched to their limits. We talk about it a lot. But there are now growing signs that those pressures are directly impacting school children in England. The number of teachers leaving the profession, coupled with sluggish recruitment, mean that teaching vacancies are at their highest rate ever. Well, here with a little more on this is our education reporter, Anjum Pirbakas. Anjum, the numbers aren't adding up, are they? There's a hemorrhaging of teachers and not enough coming in. Talk us through the statistics.
So we know that Bridget Phillipson has made recruitment for teachers a priority, and it was in their manifesto. They wanted to recruit 6,500 teachers, very clearly stated. But what we've seen today in the results that have been published by the NFER, the National Foundation for Education Research, that 6,000 teachers' vacancies are currently in the system. And that's a huge amount. And it's going to have a lasting impact for children. But we also saw last year over 40,000 teachers left the profession, and previously over 40,000 teachers left the profession. So we have to start asking about why this is happening and what is going to be the plan to remedy and rectify this situation.
Behind the statistics are the people. What are the reasons for teachers leaving the profession?
So anecdotally, yesterday, an ex-student who has become a teacher contacted me and said, I've been doing it for 5 years. I thought that I was going to leave the profession, but I thought I'd change schools and see if that made a difference. I'm heading to burnout. He changed schools, but then a year later, he said it's much of a muchness. The situation is the same. He still feels as though workload is a real pressure. And we know workload, along with pupil behaviour, post-pandemic have been issues for teachers and really are not being resolved at any level.
Yeah, because it's about education. It's also about pastoral care as well, isn't it? There's so much that goes into a teaching job, aside from what happens in the classroom. And you know this only too well, Anja, because you were a secondary school teacher yourself up until fairly recently. You only left the profession a year ago. Do you mind talking a little bit about why you left?
I mean, just the positives were there, and I stayed in the profession for over 20 years, but it got to a point where workload was a real issue. I think the model that we currently have for teachers in this country is that you could be teaching something like 21 out of 25 hours, and those 4 hours for a secondary school teacher would be dedicated to your planning and your marking, all of your administration, your report writing, your data entry. And I think that there just aren't enough hours in the day if you're going to be able to do all of that, as well as at the chalk face teaching 21 out of 25 hours in the week.
What is the answer? Is it more teachers?
Ultimately, it would be more teachers and investment, because if you're going to reduce the teachers' teaching load, you'd need to reduce that, and so somebody else would need to pick that up. So you would need more investment, you would need more teaching and teachers in the classroom, definitely.
OK. Anja, really good to hear from you and get your perspective as well. Anja and Pierre Bacos there, our education reporter. Good to see you. Thank you. As to come here on the programme, have Tesco cracked the code to cutting waste with their new initiative? Details on the way. Tesco is going to start giving away free food to help meet its net zero targets. The supermarket is going to trial 0 pence yellow stickers on items that are about to expire. They're going to give this food away after 9:30 at night in some of their smaller stores. This is happening in the coming months. Well, let's speak now to the environmental scientist Angela Terry, who's also the founder of One Home, a charity helping people adapt to a low-carbon lifestyle. Really good to speak to you, Angela. When I first saw this story this morning, I thought, oof, you know, that's some good news. That's some philanthropy there, good news for those who need it in those local areas. But when I read a bit more about it, this is very much also about corporate numbers and hitting targets. Perhaps you could tell us a bit more.
Sure. And in a way, what Tesco's does matters for so many reasons. Firstly, because they're the biggest supermarket. And so what they can do is have scale such good solutions, and then also others will copy them. What's happening is that we have an awful lot of food waste in this country. And it's, you know, eating is one of the greatest pleasures in life, but we've got around 7 million people who are struggling to put food on their tables. So by giving away food at the end of the day, Tesco's are not only reducing what they have to pay for waste disposal, like the amount they'd have to pay for trucks to come and take away their bins, but they're also reducing carbon emissions. So it is one of these situations where it's a win-win for everyone. I wouldn't want to be there at 9:30 at night. It might be a bit of a scrum, but hopefully they'll find a way to make it work.
If you need food, you'd get in amongst that scrum, wouldn't you?
You would, absolutely. I mean, the thought that obviously they're saying they're going to still prioritise the charities they give it to and their staff, but then if it's still going to face going in a bin, then it's absolutely brilliant that it won't go to waste and people will get food for free, especially
Why hasn't this been done before? Because, you know, Tesco's and other big supermarkets do support local food banks, whether it's customers donating items themselves or they have charity initiatives, all of that goes on. But why have they not done this before? Because I remember, you know, asking in, oh gosh, like a store before, like, where does this all go at night? And they say it goes in the bin. Why can't it go to local homeless shelters or, you know, health and safety or whatever? There were so many reasons. But this is such a simple and obvious idea. Why hasn't it been implemented before?
Yeah, and like you say, late at night, the staff just want to lock up and go home, and there's no volunteers. You know, if you think about the third sector, who the volunteers are, they tend to be older people who perhaps have retired from work, so they're not going to be around at 10 o'clock at night to take food to a homeless shelter. So this is why it's such a good idea when there is nowhere else to keep this food. And another key reason is that so much food does get wasted across the whole food supply chain.
Yeah, can you give us an idea of the scale of that? I'm just looking at, you know, what Tesco have said, and they said they are going to offer this expiring food first to charities and shop workers before customers would then take it. So they're sort of taking care of a lot of people with this. But when we look at, you know, how many supermarkets there are in the UK, what is the level of waste at the moment? Food going directly from the shelves that we're seeing here into the bin?
Yeah, so across the whole chain, it is a staggering amount. It's about a third of all food gets put to waste. Now, that doesn't all happen at the store. It happens across the whole supply chain. So an average family will waste about £65 a month on food. But there's things like farmers are growing produce. Obviously, with all the wet weather we've had, it's harder and harder to grow the perfect food. And the supermarkets have such a monopoly on buying the food from the farmers that they have in the past insisted on perfect shaped and no blemishes, you know, looking for that perfect produce that's going to look the best on their stores. But the reality is, because we're having so much floods and then boomeranging to drought in the summer, producing that kind of crop. So the more we can have wonky vegetables and incentivize customers to accept different varieties of food and food that might not be perfect to the eye but still tastes perfect in the tummy, that's the sort of consumer swing we need to see supermarkets do so that farmers get paid for food that they've grown. We increase food security, we help maintain food prices because they keep coming up. We're heading into awful April. We've got energy bills going up, water bills going up next month. So it's about how can we get food onto people's tables that's healthy, nutritious, seasonal, but also is affordable. And that's where getting rid of the waste and not having such high aesthetic standards. We're not talking about lowering quality, but making sure that all the plastic packaging is got rid of and that we accept the food that we can grow now that we have global warming and extreme weather coming to us so frequently, both in the UK and around the world.
OK, Angela, thank you very much. Angela Terry, there, founder of One Home. Angela is an environmental scientist.
Thank you, Sarah-Jane.
Thank you. Good to talk to you. Now, we don't get too many Hollywood A-listers on the UK tonight, but one of the biggest of them all is in London this evening. Robert De Niro is on the red carpet at the premiere of his new movie, The Alto Knights, where he plays both leading men. Debbie Reigard went to meet him.
The idea of playing the two parts was an interesting one for me. I don't know if it was, say, fascinating. I was anxious to make it work, but I said, okay, I'm going to try. So, and it was good. I was glad I did. It worked out for me. I thought it worked out pretty well because I was, as I said, concerned about that.
Well, when we watch this as well, like looking at Costello, he's looking back at his life in the 1950s. I suppose when we're looking at that, that's 75 years ago now. If we're looking at this in this stage now in 2025, what do you think that in 75 years' time people are going to look back at 2025 America? What do you think that their reflections are going to be on this time?
God knows. God knows. It's a good question. I just don't know. I couldn't imagine. I mean, it'll be something. We hope it's all good.
Debbie Reigard there rendering Robert De Niro speechless on the red carpet. Right. Still to come on the UK tonight, we'll speak to the 10-year-old who has turned to fitness to beat his gaming addiction and to tackle bullying, and he has inspired millions online. And in the sport, we'll look ahead to a new season in Formula One.
This is how you travel when the mafia wants to kill you.
He's almost given up his own freedom, but that's the price he's willing to pay.
Here, they don't just arrest and Ndrangheta mafia members, they also live among them.
Time after time, I've seen the devastating impact of extreme weather and climate change.
We don't have much snow at the moment.
They've had a warm spring and exceptionally hot summer, and that means they're expecting to lose more than 3 times the amount of ice than they usually do.
Flames are still forcing people from their homes and leaving many questioning their futures.
Here was my life. We have nothing. I can't say anything. It's so sad.
This disaster is testing the resolve of everyone on this island.
The only way out now is by boat.
Everything you see is devastated, and the misery being felt by people living here is repeated in towns and villages across Central Europe.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead. The loss is profound.
Whole families died in this collapse, generations wiped out. The violence has penetrated the heart of the city rather than being contained to the estates around the edge, and that speaks to the level of anger being felt here.
In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
This is an example of an advert, really. Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
Exclusively on Peacock. 2 teams, 1 city, everything on the line.
Clubs off, let them rip into each other again.
Arsenal.
Oh, that's a brilliant strike!
Victory can keep their title hopes alive.
Arsenal flying!
But Chelsea need all 3 points in their own chase for top 4.
Who else?
This is the Premier League. Streaming on Peacock.
Hello, welcome back. Coming up, the 10-year-old boy bullied out of football who has now become a fitness inspiration to thousands. But first, let's talk to Rob. He's here with the sport, and we are on the cusp of the new Formula One season. Actually gets underway in Melbourne. It is, of course, the Australian Grand Prix. And Lewis Hamilton, 7-time world champion, has actually come out and said he's never been more excited for the start of a new season. I wonder why that is.
Well, I mean, it's just so weird seeing him in red, isn't it? It just seems a bit odd seeing your ex with someone new, isn't it? But there he goes, into his first season as a Ferrari driver. I guess he's excited twofold, really. One is because he talks about the time as a young lad where he raced on F1 games as Michael Schumacher in the Ferrari. This is his dream, to race for Ferrari and try and deliver a bit of success. They've not won a driver's title since 2007, not won the constructors since a year later. I guess the other reason that he himself is excited is because it ended at Mercedes with a car that was not particularly competitive, down in 7th in the overall standings. He cut a pretty frustrated figure, and now he goes into this new season 7 times a world champion at the age of 40. Can he become the first ever 8-time world champion and break the record of a Ferrari great in Michael Schumacher?
Yeah, that would definitely be his aim, won't it? And red really suits him. I like red.
Yeah.
Lewis Hamilton, yeah, I think it looks good. Max Verstappen, of course, has won the last 4 World Drivers' Championships titles. Who's the favourite this year? I mean, is that a silly question? Is it him? Because you get to the point, certainly in a Formula One season, where, you know, it can be a bit of a parade, can't it?
Yeah, I think I remember a couple of seasons ago having Damon Hill on after the first race on Sky Sports News and saying this could get quite boring, couldn't it? And he did his best to say no, but it did. But it's different this time around. And Max Verstappen, towards the end of last season, didn't have it all his own way. He'd established such a big lead in the Drivers' Championship that he did go on to take a 4th straight title. But it's another Brit, not Lewis Hamilton, but Lando Norris this time, who's the favourite for the title. McLaren won the Constructors' Championship. Norris with 4 race wins. Him and Oscar Piastri teamed up to deliver success for McLaren. So it promises to be a little bit more open this time than it has been in recent years. It'll be fascinating to see Max Verstappen's mood if things don't go his way, because he's not the greatest of losers, I think it's fair to say, the Dutchman. So if he is playing catch-up to Lando Norris and alike, it will be interesting to see how he takes that. But it all starts in the early hours of tomorrow morning with the first practice session in Melbourne. Busy night of football, though. Let's just bring you the latest from across 4 European ties for British clubs.
Staying connected is vital for business. Sky Business sponsors this report.
I remember when I first went on trial at under 9, I just couldn't concentrate. There'd be like games going on and I'd be looking over there. I just went off and played club football for a while, went back at under 11s, under 12s. And yeah, I had a lot of ups and downs. There was times where I was 16, you know, when you want to go out and stuff like that. And that's when you truly have to make sacrifices that I found it really difficult. Once I got my feet on the ground and worked hard, then yeah, the journey through the youth team was much easier.
Spent time on loan at Western-super-Mare. Did the progression from there always seem straightforward?
I always take things, you know, day by day and not look too far ahead. So I was just focusing on progressing and just trying to cement myself in the first team, because I didn't see myself as a first-team player then. Yeah, I was just trying to focus on playing, you know, a lot of games and improving, and then see where that took me.
And then the moves came, of course. Brentford first, and then...
Sky Business sponsors this report.
Now, our next guest tonight is a 10-year-old who has been inspiring millions of people on social media. Jacob Whitmore quit his local football team after name-calling and bullying from other kids. He turned to gaming, which quickly became an addiction. But now, 2 boxing trainers have taken him under their wing, helping him to build up his confidence. Jacob's fitness journey is now being followed by thousands of people. I caught up with him and his trainers, Harry and Joe Freeman, earlier.
I mean, we've been doing sort of live workouts, and Jacob's granddad sort of, like I said, he'd asked, so we straight away wanted to get him involved in some workouts. Yeah, literally straight away, he was doing everything we asked of him and more. His mum was saying he was doing his exercise bike at home. He was spending less time on his computer, and yeah, we just wanted to slow his mind down a little bit, stop him being so sort of fixated on his games and just get him active, get him moving. And he's done so well.
Yeah, Jacob, what a work ethic. In fact, you know, within 4 weeks, things had changed quite dramatically for you. Jacob, tell me what differences you noticed in yourself.
I'm a lot, like, smaller now, like, and just, like, I feel a lot more, like, happy, proud, and I definitely feel a lot more, like, confident in myself.
You're now all over social media. In fact, that's how I saw you. I saw a TikTok video of your story with Harry and Joe there. You're an inspiration for other kids and other families. How do you feel about that? What have people been saying to you?
People have been coming up to me and saying, you're doing a very good job, Jacob, keep it up. Or, like, you've inspired me to do, like, a jog tonight, or, like, eating, like, I've eaten, like, a lot more, like, fruit and veg and stuff. And I just feel, like, a lot more happy.
Yeah. I mean, Joe, talk to me about the reaction, because obviously you and Harry have been getting a lot of messages as well. And in those 4 weeks, you know, you've noticed the difference in Jacob, so has his family. And this is it's a problem we hear a lot about from families. Children in their bedrooms, isolated, too much screen time, whether that's gaming or on phones. But something as simple as, you know, a buddy, essentially, to work out with, do some activities with, can make a huge difference so quickly.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, we've been actually getting so many messages, haven't we?
Thousands.
Emails, messages on all social media. And, yeah, we're just looking at getting back to everyone and looking at doing something.
Yeah, we've already started working with a few other children. We understand that, you know, there's a big problem all over the UK, you know, kids struggling mentally, physically. You know, our inbox suggests that, you know, it's out there. And, you know, if there can be a positive sort of role models online, you know, me and my brother Boxwave and Jacob leading the way, you know, if we can share this message, it's amazing.
OK, well, listen, Jacob, a final message from you to any kids watching who might be having a bit of a tough time from kids at school and who are spending too much time gaming. What's your message to them tonight?
Try to, like, limit yourself when you're, like, gaming too much. Like, say, like, you do, like, I don't know, like 20 minutes of exercise, you get, like, 20 minutes of, like, gaming time or watching time or whatever. So, like, it's, like, equivalent. And to anybody getting, like, called names or just getting picked on, like, just ignore them and just, like, get on with your day and go, like, just, like, don't take it to heart.
The ideal atmosphere, whatever the altitude. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It's going to be cold over the next few days, widespread overnight frost and some potentially wintry showers. Daytime showers will largely fade to leave most places dry this evening, but Scotland will see patchy rain and hill snow moving in. That wintry mix will spread across northern and central parts overnight, with wintry showers following to northern Scotland later. It will turn frosty for many, especially over southern Britain, with some fog for the southeast.
The perfect climate, whatever the forecast. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
That's all from the UK tonight. Up next is Gillian with the world.